tone deaf. I'm considering just turning the voices off. Everything about this game is like unlikable, save for like maybe kind of the offensive combat. Well, play Ricky. We should get just
Attention, it's your principal. Looks like we've got some troublemakers in detention. You kids know what to do.
Yeah, this is that case where you don't really have a lot of defensive options starting out. So I feel like there's no concept here as far as counterplay goes. I think that's the big issue with basically RPGs, just action RPGs, where the RPG is too vocal. But get the shot. Yeah, I don't think Ricky really gets amazing until you get some moves. But I think he's a little more fun endgame than Kunio is. Oh yeah. So, I think the big thing in this game are just variations of dodge, take, turn. Or wait, take, turn.
So what's the plan?
There's not a lot in the way of manipulations, I think. I'm using the mod because I think the standard game, it's just really bad.
Thanks. I just came up with it.
Like, you'll accidentally pick up items a lot,
crazy
accidentally pick up enemies in scrambles. So, I guess it's designed to kind of just be junk food, so there's only so much you can really complain about. At the end of the day, I think that the target demographic is temporarily invested.
Don't let those girls out of here.
Like the enemies just kind of get up like galaxy brains, so there's not there's a lot of waiting, but you're just confirming to see if you got the right to have a mechanic work or not. So there, it's like I walked up. I can either wait for the enemy to do something, or just basically hold that.
I wonder who took Kunio and Ricky. I wonder who sent us that text message.
Yeah, I don't know, the Sabu statues, I got them all, and it's just kind of like, I think you get
to find out
like
who
a
sent us
pendant
that
or something
text.
for the secret ending. I mean, I've beaten it before, it's just,
Blocked collar.
I'm honest to
That's a weird
God
name.
not paying
Damn
attention
it.
to this shit a lot of the
It would be
time.
blocked.
Because I think
Oh, yeah.
it's not even interesting from an adolescent
Come on.
standpoint, but I feel like you couldn't get here if the original River City Ransom didn't exist, so take that for what it's worth. Like here, I'm just waiting. So I kind of wish that there was a better offensive flow to everything. There is a point where you basically steamroll and whatnot, but...
Oh, look.
Oh god, shut up. I kind of want to play Kunio Tachi Tenka... No, I keep wanting to say Tenka no Banka. Kunio Tachi no Banka.
Those girls seem nice.
I really want to play
But
that.
they're crazy.
Oh?
Because
They think
I
they're
think the big
dating
thing is that they
Kunio
were
and Ricky.
presenting...
What? They better not be.
Relax.
They were presenting a
Their
story that
brains
was a
are
little
just
more...
Gonna be a lot
I-
more broken if they ever take
I hate
my
to say, I hate to say mature, but for a video game, yeah, because they dispense with a lot of the RPG mechanics, which is a big part of the escape. I mean, part of the game takes place in jail, so the very first thing that the game establishes is a lack of freedom. Now, the funny thing is that the big point, or the big dramatic point about that story is growing up to cooperate with the police. This is delinquent. So I think it's still not out of line with the Kunio games, but I still think it's pretty good, even though its politics kind of suck.
Now do you understand? Not at all. Well, let's
like, as an action game, it's just very ambitious in a way that, like, this game is not. Like, this game has remixes of music from that game, but they lack any sort of punch or drama, because it's ostensibly, like,
not here today.
I don't know, if early 2000 webcomics could be a video game, this would be it, where there's just an overall sense of creepiness, like, implicitly hitting on having adult characters hit on minors. The plot of the game being obsessed with the sexual rituals of fucking young people, like teenagers. I guess what I like about Kunio Tachi no Banka is that at the very least it shows that this type of behavior makes you susceptible to, like, fascist tendencies or whatever. So there's some truth to it. Ooh, got the back attack. So that's where the mod really shines, I think. So you can back attack and it has armor, like auto parry. So you actually have an option to commit to. Now I wish that there was more to be done about enemies blocking. Man, the whiff on his jab also is, like, so bad. Like, it's very slow. Like, his overall move list is really good, Ricky, but this, you are committed. It's kind of silly how bad that is. I don't know why that's called Fatal Steps, but, because it doesn't resemble Fatal Steps as I remember it. Maybe there's... I think... Oh yeah, Fatal Steps was a... Wow. Fatal Steps, now that I remember, that was a knockdown move. It was to keep the enemy on the floor. But basically, the manipulations as I know them in this game are knocking an opponent down, standing above them, and timing a parry. Otherwise, it's dodge, take, turn. You know, there's nothing really exceptional or that's been learned over the past few, you know, decades of action games. I think God Hand is really the outlier in that sense because Shinji Mikami was, like, thinking about... It's a bit frenetic, but he was thinking about the interaction between the player and the CPU in a way that it clearly reflects that you don't just want to have, like, the classic soup du jour of, yeah, there, I just reacted. You don't want to have the classic soup du jour of old beat-em-ups where you have to design around having infinites, which is, like, he did too, but it's that he specifically put an infinite at the wall. You can't just perpetually jab your enemy over and over, which I think is fun in and of itself, but you can only portray that so many times. Oh yeah, the other thing I want to say is that parry's kind of whack, to be honest. Because you can parry one enemy, but you can't parry, like, everything. You can't parry projectiles. That's actually hard to parry, so when she's, like, taking off at you, the actual startup of the kick is so abrupt. So I just feel like there's a lot of subsystems in this game where they're there. I don't even know why you would have your daughters or whoever playtest this, or maybe it was I don't know. I'm making a lot of presumptions, but you playtest this game and you have mechanics from action games, but they just seem really poorly realized. So I think this game is an anomaly, or for me, where I'm just sort of looking at it, and it has things that I think are mechanically addicting, that feel good, but I can't, you know, I don't want to subsist on that, and I feel like, in a lot of ways, it's just getting through this analysis that I want to do, so I can just sort of move on.
You students are a disgrace. Oh well.
Because it's definitely, like, I don't even want to say, like, I feel that modern American cartoons, at the very least, are... You run into the stupid ones where it's, like, someone trying to talk about mental health in a fucking cartoon that's aimed at kids or whatever. Like it's your therapy session instead, and you're saying it's for the kids, but it's very clearly for the creator. But this game kind of permeates a lot of the present moment's more irritating influences. Yeah, like right here, I would have to run out of the way if it were in the base game, because I would be picking up the enemies or accidentally picking up this whip chain. They also made it so that weapons are just kind of... They deal massive damage, but they knock down, so the trade-off is, again, pace. Felt like no one was really thinking about pace in this game. And it brings up Ego Raptor to me, talking about the difference between Legend of Zelda... I'm gonna mute the voices. But it's like the difference between Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time and Legend of Zelda A Link to the Past. Now, if you just keep it at face value, and it's the Legend of Zelda 2D versus 3D, I feel like it's easy to kind of miss the interesting segments or portions of that. And the interesting aspect of that is that embedded in that isn't really a generational argument about Zelda, to me. It's that the very first idea for 3D action for Nintendo was, you have Z targeting and basically lots of waiting. Yeah, I don't think I can slap her twice. Yeah, you have to just clear out. There's too much recovery on Ricky's moves. Woo. Might have to focus here, because I really don't want to continue, because I have to go through all that shit again. Seriously? Slap her once and get out of there. So she should run 3 or stomp 3 times. 1. Oh, big brain. Ah-ha-ha. Slap. But the sophomoric idea, or I guess for Ocarina of Time and action, 3D action, was dodge, take, turn. You wait, and that's what Ego Raptor was, that's what was getting on his nerves. It was basically constantly having to wait. Oh, this is such a good move. Like, sadly, I think there's the components of a really good game, but there's no direction, I feel. Oh, hell yeah. So I think with Ricky, there's a lot of commitment built in. But it's funny to say this because there's not... that's the big problem with this game. There hasn't been a lot of consideration put beyond that. It's just sort of things that are there. Nice. So Ricky commits, like, heavily. Like, he has a lot of weighty recovery and all that. But the payoff is that there's so much utility to his moveset. I actually think he's a lot more fun than Kunio. Like, I'm already leveling people, which is nice. But the big issue I have is that you go through the whole game. This is the big problem I was talking with King Dolce about with Street Fighter 1. It's just like when it rains, it pours, is how he put it. The goal of the game is to never interact with the computer. That every interaction that you'd have is bad. So That is if you're committing to something. So there's a very explicit, there's an explicit binary to what I think are implicitly turns. Oh god, that was a horrible way of putting it. Let me rephrase that. It is very clear that a choreography concept in this game, the fight design, is taking turns. So if you don't take your turn at the... Oh my god, that was so good. You could not... What I just did there, that's why the patch is so good. It's only one thing, but say you're committed to attacking. If the enemy does commit to running behind you and trying to hit you, you can parry and do a back attack, which makes the back attack meaningful. It's probably one of the only instances where I felt like throwing an attack backwards means something. Oh, sweet. And it juggles. I mean, this will fix the... It'll at least make the game more pleasant to go through. But part of why I'm playing through it is I just want to talk about... I don't want to show it, but maybe I should have, like, I'll have to turn on the audio again, but, you know, Misuzu's kind of a missed opportunity then, in that sense. Eat that. Yeah, like, that jump in. I don't know what the jump... Oh, man. And the run-in so missing? Go figure. Typical. So, I feel like there's an imbalance between whether the RPG elements vocalize the game, which is what a lot of the old Kunio games mostly did, and skill. And that's why I thought that it's ironic that this game takes after Kunio Tachi no Banka, or Tenka no... I keep wanting to say Tenka, but that's something else. Because, again, that game completely dispensed with RPG mechanics. It was a pure action game. And so I felt that by being a pure action game, it lent itself to the tone that the game had, which was like a very sort of, what is it? I keep wanting to say seinen, but I think seinen's like a different thing. But at the big thing is that it was a little more adult, and this was something that you would see like general, I guess, I don't want to say general audience, but you saw it with like the Dragon Quest remakes on Super Nintendo, where they chose a decidedly like Mega Man X. There's another example. So young teenager, like versus, I guess, kid. And it's not to say that I feel that children's like good sort of children-themed shows. So not, oh, this is the intended audience, but the aesthetic that you use, like the setting or whatever. Because I think Studio Ghibli films like would be a good example, where you can have the story take place from the perspective of someone who's young, or they're the central protagonist, or it's, you know, it's about that kind of perspective, like what type of story or narrative you're getting. So I'm not trying to say, like, this is the audience, and this is your metric. Like, I'm not concerned with that shit. What I'm saying is that when I get here, the perspective is about children, but it feels like a trick, because it's just some weeb. Like, it's someone where, this isn't even Japan. Like, there's a point in the story where Kyoko starts complaining about walking. She's like, I never had to walk this much. You live in Japan! Walking is like an everyday occurrence. And the other thing is that complaining like that, it's funny, but I feel that no matter how much people want to rebel, there is a cultural element of trying hard and doing your best. So the reason I, like, it's like, oh, well, the weeb is saying who the weeb is. Like, well, wouldn't I know? You know? But I'm not Japanese, I'm American, so I'm not invested beyond the fact that games like this get here. Like, I have to sort of reckon with that. You know, the goods exchange materially creates weebs. So at the very least, you know, don't be a complete piece of shit, like, doing it. But this game supposedly in the plot takes place in Japan. But what I think is that it's like a webcomic That's the webcomic aesthetic. It's just like, man, this is the Mega Tokyo. Like, this is the Mega Tokyo of video games. This is where we were headed. But then the other thing, getting back to the Kunio Tachi no Banka, is that a lot of, like, the soundtrack, the drama of it, maybe it was inevitably gonna lead here, but it definitely was better in a way that I think this game isn't. In terms of being invested in the action. Like, I feel like this game, because it models itself after games that didn't have much in the way of, I guess, fidelity. Like, the big thing was cutscenes and dialogue. But as a consequence, what you get is... Yeah, take that. As a consequence, I feel that you get this very anemic action that's on screen. 3, 4... Like, you fight characters that are just anime rejects, like very generic, sort of stylized versions of how someone imagines delinquents to be or whatnot. Like why you would become a sukeban, or how, like, the cultural stuff of it is just kind of a formality that isn't even paid into. See, I'm waiting to dash for all these people to get up. I should have just engaged him. So instead, I get, like... The fact that there's a video where... Like, there's an instructional video in this game that supposedly takes place in Japan. And the joke... I bet... I get the feeling that it's a bunch of YouTube voice actors ad-libbing. And I looked up the writer, and apparently they wrote Transformers: The Dark Spark, so I'm guessing the fact that this game feels as if it consulted a wiki, or was written by committee, or themed by committee, designed by committee, that kind of makes sense to me. That, or there's just always this thing where these games feel obligated to be a certain way. Man, I can't break this real quick. Yeah. So, this is the Scott Pilgrim problem just now. I'm just going to change gears, so I'll get more into the narrative consequence or the way that affects action later. But the major thing here is that, like, blocking. If enemies block and you're Ricky, you have such heavy commitment, and there's no throw until you hit something, so ostensibly... The enemy controls the pace, and I've said this a lot, but in this case, it's another example of why that's kind of bad, because you're stopping. There's a lull in the action because the game feels obligated to give the enemy a turn, but I feel that instead there should be different reactions. Again, this is a God hand thing, but there should be different reactions to what you're doing. Like, I think standing above the opponent and getting them to mash, you can mitigate that with numbers. But then the other thing is that, I think in a one-on-one fight, it would kind of stand to reason that the girls or, you know, their boyfriends could have some kind of competency. So yeah, otherwise, right now in the game, I'm just doing side quests for money, I guess. 1, 2, 3, 4. Because I really want to bolster my moveset. Not having moves in this game is whack. Yep. So I don't mind enemies doing that, but it would be nice if there were, like, different interactions. But I feel like against the CPU, like, maybe change up, like. Because every enemy does that. Like, inevitably it just gets monotonous where it's like, alright, I'm committing to the parry. So I felt like it's not making the most of having enemy types in the first place. Oh, 1-inch punch, that's a... So, this is another part where the improvement patch is a significant improvement over the original. So if an enemy is blocking, you can guard break them with this. Now, the problem with Ricky is that, again, he's slow. And if the enemy blocks, they eat his ability to chain cancel. Like that. One, two, three, 4. But overall, like, I feel like if... Oh yeah, that's the other thing. Enemies will also stop... They'll just stop blocking once you do that. So it's definitely something that wasn't, like, in the concept of the game. Like, you were just supposed to really just wait. Like, let the enemy have their turn. But I don't know what that turn amounts to other than pace breaking, which is why I'm so critical of it. Well, I shouldn't say I don't know. I do know. All it does by letting the enemy block that way and just sort of... It's like screeching the game to a halt for the sake of it. That bad, in my opinion. No, it is bad. It ain't just mine. I'm reminded of that scene from The Water Boy. It's just like, it's not my opinion, it's how it's... Well, it's not exactly what she said, but I'll paraphrase. That ain't what I think, it's not my opinion, it's how it's gonna be. I guess it's like a prediction. But I'm getting ready to do a talk on God Hand, so I want to get used to playing something. And I'll probably look it up later, but I kind of want to go into that without any practice, just to kind of show my points about how you're expected to play. But I want to maintain a sort of, I guess, even though casual game day, I at least want to show that you don't have to be obsessed with the game to kind of enjoy it, or at least perceive its design. Because I think that's possible. We're expecting people to, like, do the only people that get to be good at games have to be the ones that are just, like, living it as a lifestyle choice? Because that in itself is kind of a sad part of modernity. Like, it just really stopped being a game that you play. But it's not to disparage pro gaming, it's that's effectively someone pretending to be a pro in games that would realistically just not have a scene. You know, that's what ends up being. I wonder if I think the back attack has... Yeah, I can just do the back attack manually. So, I can parry that. I mean, in the original game, I would just have to hold that shit. Where if I kill an enemy, or if I'm comboing one and one's just running up to me and I'm committed to something, that's why I'm saying the enemies have an inordinate control around the pace of the game. Over it. Yeah, eat that. I thought that was there's an attack that Ricky has. It's not even good. It's not even a good attack. But it lets him warp into the enemy's face. But it does like a tickle of damage. Oh, there's something about his hitbox too. Like, I've had the second hit of enemy follow-ups not hit him. In my case though, like, I'll take that over a game that's not really gonna get much change. These songs I really want to talk about too. Because there's like a meta-narrative where Kyoko left a friend that she had. And it's the mean-spirited part of the game that I want to get into. Like, Kyoko was young and she had a friend and then Kyoko had to move, or it implies that she stole basketball hoops. Which is just, again, that's like abruptly committing acts of violence or just fantasizing about it. That's an extremely early 2000s webcomic kind of writing thing. And I don't know why you would ever, like, oh nice, the back there. I don't know why you would distribute that to kids and then like sing your praises. Like, sing your own praises and be like, oh yeah, girl power. Like, there's a part where it's like, oh, I noticed you have a... I'm like, it's so mean-spirited because the only thing you could say is just like, well, kids are dumb. Like, teenagers are dumb. And I'm like, but you were making this observation. So, the thing is that with delinquents, there's inherently this thing where like rival gangs or whatever. I don't know if that was a power thing. Maybe I'm out of touch. It's just that I see that and it's like, man, that's dumb. Let's run over here. But I'll get into it more later, because no matter, you would have to uncouple this supposedly like diverse power message with the context of the game, which is that you're playing as a bunch of fucking delinquents. But this game kind of presents them as preppy, while trying to say that, oh yeah, like I'm poor. I'm so poor. And it's like, you're not poor. So it's like designing, you know, that, I guess that's what keeps it in line with the original games. which was made by an ex-delinquent, so reap what you sow. But if you want the actual good version of this game, just play fucking Yakuza. Yeah, that's what you're supposed to do. They block, and you just wait. So just to close up the whole dodge, take turn discussion. Enemy blocks, you just wait. So I did appreciate that the patch tried to like alleviate some of that sort of agonizing wait time. I should just chop. The 1-inch punch is fast, but it doesn't do a lot of damage. And I kind of wish that the neutral punch was the guard break, but I guess there's always this out of context. Like, I think that, to transition to another talking point, when you're looking at action games, what you'll see a lot of people do if they're trying to defend the game, and what is probably something bad, is they'll start being like, oh, well, this move does lots of damage. And what should be implicit there is that it's the problem with the game isn't having moves that, like, hurt. This game is very smothering offense. If you hit someone and they're in a combo, you can just juggle them for days. So there's no problem with obtaining damage. In fact, having, like, a punctuating element is rather nice. Let's refresh your browser. Wow, that Sobot kick, whoever made it. I feel like it's the bait and switch. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, that does more damage. I wonder if the scales off special. But someone was telling me, like, I brought up that I wished, or I thought that there's a move in this game where you can launch the enemy and then air grab them for a giant slam. Cost meter. And for me, the modest proposal I had, which would probably extend even further to even further changes, was that I felt that there should be some invincibility on that move. And the funny thing is that Kunio's throws in this game, like if he throws somebody, he has invincibility. His throws work exactly the way I would want them to, where you throw an enemy, and because of the limited actions that you can take, he gets invulnerability so that you can keep the flow of action going. You can keep engaging enemies, like thinking strategically, if that's the game we're playing. Instead, if I commit to something in this game, oh yeah, Godai, but he's really, like, I don't know, John Septiceye or something. 1, 2, 3, 4. The YouTube extravaganza. I didn't like the portrayal of the Double Dragon guys, but I like Game Grumps in terms of Aaron Hansen. Like, they're chill. They're cool. So I think they did a good job. So not everyone here is, like, bad, but I feel like they're not working with much. Godai is just a fan thing, miscasting. Like, but, if we're gonna throw... fuck it. It's not. Miscasting, I just think that is kind of shit, because they wanted to... I'm like, just let him do his accent. If you're gonna throw, like, white people in here, Like, let the man have his fucking accent when he's talking. Because there's a point where he just says, fuck it. You can tell that early on, like, this first bit of dialogue. Yeah, I wish I could parry that. But anyway, his first bit of dialogue is stronger than his last bits. But what just happened there was a problem I wanted to say, that it was a problem with the parry in this game, which is that you can't parry all attacks. So you have bosses further emphasize this idea that people making action games, developers, when they're conceiving of it, a parry is only a parry, like, in the sense that, like, oh, well, you can have this move to beat up, like, normal people, but now, when you're fighting, like, the big boys... Oh yeah, that's my chain. I want to get the... Yeah, shadow combo. This move sucks. But, yeah. That table flip. Is that the background? But anyway, there's this emphasis on dodge, take, turn. And I feel that when you spread that across a bunch of bosses where it's just like, you have to change the theme of them to something other than fighting, I feel that the beat 'em up premise essentially collapses. The pretense is gone. Cheap shot. Like that. We got 122. I don't really like that, but... Huh. Oh, I think that's his back throw? It's a grab. Just trying to decide, okay, that's the super throw. I already have a good running move. This is good. So, we'll get back to I will get back to the action pacing. So, or action design. Gotta make sense of my chain first. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, it's 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. There we go. But, you have a bunch of bosses in this game where eventually it becomes like a shmup. Or, you know, they got Guitar Hero. And while I think you could try to say it's a good spirited reference, it just kind of shows how whack the action is comparatively to, I think, action games that were actually fight choreographed by a fucking stuntman. So Muneki Ebinuma, he worked on Return of Double Dragon, but he also worked on Kunio Tachi no Banka. And a lot of the ideas from Return of Double Dragon that didn't get used in that game or put into completion, they were able to insert it into that game. So, not only that, so he thinks about the fact that action, you know, is depicted, gameplay, therefore would be kind of what you put on screen versus just, oh, it's a game. Like, they didn't have that preoccupation, Muneki Ebinuma, where it's just like, oh yeah, a video game is a video game. Like, they're not asking stupid questions in the game. Like, Hideo Kojima, I think that's what gets misunderstood about him popularizing quote-unquote meta text, breaking the fourth wall. Hold on. Can't parry that, it's done, it's bad. But he was always faithful to this idea that it was a game depicting the real world. So he wants to remind you that it's a game, but there's always that contrast of saying, in order to point out the deceit, he had to deceive you. I feel like there's a lack of utilizing that in fan games, or I shouldn't say fan games, but I mean, shit, Metal Gear Solid's a fan game. John Carpenter fan game, yeah. Oh, that I would do the trouble. But I feel like there's a cart before the horse mentality about the way that action gets shown and then breaking the fourth wall. So I shouldn't say action, but just any gameplay. Like, if you're gonna point out, if you're gonna try to show reality or whatnot, you have to also commit to the deceit. And some people, like, I feel like the largest extension of that is subtext. Like, the furthest down the range you can get, which is why I think subtext is maligned. So here you could say that there's a subtext of empowerment or blah blah blah, but you're still showing a bunch of high schoolers doing whatever in this oddly kind of liberal way. Let's go. Can I get that move? Let's see if I can get it. Acorn Breaker. That's the throw. Oh, Acro Dragon. Yeah, that's a good freaking move. Oh, it's Stone Hand. Did I get it? Yeah, I did. His hand actually turns into a stone. Shadow combo's whack. You know, I'm gonna buy it just to illustrate. Alright, so now I have a special. So he throws this. So that launches them. But it knocks down! Why would you have a gap closer that knocks down? Then what was the point? Oh man, it's so bad. It's just like, oh, crowd control, and I guess if there's something between I don't know. Like, whatever's at the end of that should not go flying. So I guess the crowd element is that, but why can't it have a crowd element and be a gap closer? Especially in a game like this, where you're not fighting human opponents. It would be too good. But just the move itself, on a conceptual level, is just kind of overpowering. You have to think about stuff like that as a designer. That's why I thought that, oh hey, you're back. Yeah, I didn't get that. There we go. I have to break into some loot out. But for all we talk about games that, you know, oh, did it age well, blah, blah, blah. We don't actually identify those things that didn't age well. We just assume that because it's old, it was bad. And that's not enough. Like, that's not doing the work. Got something caught in my throat. So something I felt hasn't aged well is the utilization of moves that are, you know, some people say OP or unbalanced, but I would say that I would take it a step further and say that it's broken precisely because you have developers putting in moves that on a conceptual level break their concepts. So if your point is to have an interaction between like fighters, this move right here, that needs to cost like his entire bar and have a penalty on SP regeneration. If you're gonna have a move like that. Which is funny because, like, why would I ever, like, want something like that? That's kind of against my feelings on the game. But if you're going to have it, the reason is that we started seeing characters, like, the example I have from a past game, a specific example, would be Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, or... Yeah, I just say that. That game kind of leaned in on the fact that the boss characters were bosses. So... it kind of accentuated, well not kind of, it really accentuated the abilities of boss characters. So Claw is ridiculously fast, on top of already having range and whatnot. And what I feel is significant about this is that as it pertains to what I'm saying, where you have gameplay concepts that just completely break, or you have someone that's just super good at the style of game you've designed. So controlling space on a 2D field. Claw ostensibly doesn't need a special move to have what is effectively a projectile or close to it. Like, he's carrying a weapon, you know, that's the point. But he was a boss character test. So I think having those things was to try to accentuate something about what was a single player encounter. So when you move that into Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, I like that game. You know, it kind of works in that game. But then you started seeing Claw get into other games, and it's kind of stressful to fight a character like that, because he's not trying to have an up-close battle, so he's not even compatible. He checkmates people that want to get in your face, because he has all the tools that he needs to get out or to escape, while also preventing every other fucking character from engaging in, like, their martial arts. So, you know, you would have to change Claw in that sense. I think that's what SF5 tries to do. And at the very least, I would commend them for doing that, but then it just kind of begs the question, why use Claw at all? That's something I like about Shinji Mikami, where hearing him talk about games, I say this a lot, he doesn't draw a distinction between what he's doing as a designer, like element to element. He's not going like, oh yeah, this is the story part, you know, it's just flavor, you know, it's not important. You can tell, like, there was some thought put, even if it was just to amount to a joke, there's some thought put to what he wants players to experience. There's that block. I think you have to commit. Like, so I broke his guard, but I feel like the patch definitely wasn't about hit confirming. 1, 2, 3, 4, back. Better heal though. Like, a cheerleader will just mollywop if I take it. Oh, or, you know, just level up. That's cool. But there's a item I want for this next fight. No. No. There we go. So Mikami didn't make that distinction, which is a bit of a departure, but I think that when you're thinking, just the idea of like, oh, we have to rework Claw in a game where you're putting in damn near the entire Street Fighter 2 cast, or at least that's what you're following up on, games that were like, oh man, we need like all these characters in one game. Never mind like whether they had disparate designs or not. No, we just gotta have Dhalsim in this game. He's never been in a Street Fighter game before. So just putting Claw in there, to me, it's like trying to give yourself a challenge for the most disingenuous of reasons, which is that these folks are really just aiming to please their fans and all the kind of problems that come with fandom. It's canon. The story's not important, but I'm gonna be the first person to tell you about like some trivial piece of information that no one gives a shit about. Oh, as a complete aside, it's like, why are you jumping? I think this is probably my favorite song in the game. But I want to get on the subject of flavor. This game in particular is gotta look at these moves though, but I'll get back to that. Forget. I I want to talk about Kyoko and a character that goes by Nozomi? I think it's Nozomi. Nozomi or Noise? Bunsonville. God. We'll get to that in a second. Right. Half moon kick. Acro flip. So that's a level 5. Nah, his running kick is way too good. Why would I want, like, Acro Flip? Does Acro Flip have, like, invincibility? See, that's where utility of moves, I just feel like I wouldn't even give him this move. He has, like, running triangle. I think that's a back throw. Yeah. Like, he has that. If you're gonna entice me to buy, like, what was it, Acro something or other? Like, it better be, like, the best goddamn running move ever. Let's get behind him. Wow, that's super fucked up. And he's committed to that. I want to know if he can get hit out of that. I feel, man, those are big commitment moves. Maybe if I press triangle, I can accelerate it. 1, 2. Yeah, that's the other thing. Moves. We'll get to Nozomi in a second. Yeah. Moves with lots of animation. Nope, not invincible. So it's like definitely... There's definitely checkmate moves in this game for single player encounters, which is why like invincibility or something being really good. I wonder if you can back attack out of it? I gotta stun somebody again. Let's see that. I think I did something there. That might have canceled the animation. Maybe you mash? 3, 4, 5, 6. No? Alright. So, this game recently had a patch that changed the ending. This is about Nozomi and Kyoko and a sort of narrative relationship that they have. And the whole game, you're hearing like these vocal tracks that are by a character in the narrative, the diegesis, whatever you want to call it, a character in the story. Noise, Nozomi. And you get the story. I'm trying to touch on basically what I think is the mean-spirited, like, early 2000s-ness of this fucking game's narrative. Like, how it's basically a webcomic. But Nozomi, when you run into her later, you find out that Kyoko had befriended her for a month. And apparently in that month they were like super good friends. And then Kyoko, by exposition, just steal. You never see it either. Which would just point out that like young kids are stupid and don't know how to keep friends. Like, it's just something so out of... It's something very clearly thought of in the mind of an adult. It's only funny to an adult that's perpetually stuck in adolescence see me playing a fucking video game. But what's interesting about it is that all these layers of, you know, the panorama of mean-spiritedness, it extends beyond that. Like, you realize that, oh, I've been hearing this album from Noise, or whatever. And she's talking about chasing somebody. She's talking about, you know, oh, one moment and you're gone. And then it's like, oh yeah, like the big plot point was that Kyoko left because she stole fucking basketball hoops or something. It wasn't just like, oh, my family moved. It's like, oh, it was Kyoko's fault, and it just turns out that Noise is right to have, you know, that created her artistry. You know, so pain is art, all this stupid crap. But that intersects with, using that word is just insulting, but that oddly enough, that gets into the kind of mean-spiritedness of the game, where the premise of it is this elaborate hoax where the game shows you an anime intro of the girls and their boys getting kidnapped, and then slowly and slowly just says, no, all this stuff you saw, it was actually an elaborate ruse, and they weren't actually boyfriend and girlfriend, they weren't a couple, even though we showed you. It's like, oh, what it actually was is that these girls are delusional. And that's why just changing the ending doesn't mean anything. This is that point that Shinji, that's why I brought up Shinji Mikami. I didn't forget that I'd said it. I brought up Shinji Mikami because he'll definitely look at something as silly or stupid, and that's fine. Like, he'll just present something from the perspective that, like, okay, this is a dumb video game. You know, there's just something about this. Like, I think even Hideo Kojima does the same thing. Like, having fucking Solid Snake crawl through a server room, no matter how serious you try to paint it, it's just this old man suffering to apply a balance patch. But here, you have all these jokes, you have all this mean-spirited stuff, but there's just this sense of being out of touch. Like this song, you know, she's talking about Kyoko, and Kyoko doesn't know it. Strength and agility. Let me go back in here. Nope. Expensive shop. French ranch shop. Or French accent. Fake French accent. So, that aspect isn't really touched upon. It's like, they just write Nozomi is just hating Kyoko. But it's clear that, like, there's this weird intersection where there's, like, you know, there's a thin line between love and hate or whatever. Not invincible. See, Kunio would have... Oh, man. Kunio... That's the one good thing about Kunio. He's got good crowd control. What just happened now is that if you're not already committed to offense, this doesn't work. Which is why it's not really too great, but still nice. Otherwise, getting pincered... There's no plan from the developers for what you're supposed to do if you get pincered. But there's something just left on the table between Kyoko and Nozomi and this music that you're hearing throughout the game. And I don't really care about that, but it just feels like that's what's characteristic of just the drama of, I guess, game developer nerds. In that there is no drama. Human relationships are a formality. All while subsequently wanting to talk about them, so the relationship of high schoolers and all that. Oh, not getting experience right. And the mean-spiritedness also extends to the fact that it implies that the girls are hearing the pained thoughts or music, you know, even if it's melodramatic or hokey or saccharine or whatever. They've taken... It shows that Kyoko has completely forgotten about Nozomi until she, like, sees her again because of them interacting. But she never tried to reach out. It's like she had met Nozomi and apparently they were best friends and then she left. And it plays into the fact that the girls are so embroiled in their delusion that they can't see reality. So that's why I'm saying it's fucking mean. Because it's just like, oh yeah, stupid. Isn't it funny that this video game is a video game? By the way, this reality is that, like, it's so stupid that that's what these people are doing. And it's just like, but it's played for laughs. Like, I'm supposed to laugh at how completely insane it is. And it just comes off as nerdy and out of touch. It reminds me of that video that was done to criticize webcomics. Like, I think it was by H-Bomber Guy. They were criticizing early 90s webcomics. Or not 90s, early 2000s webcomics. And specifically how they created all these situations that were just completely violent, like randomly violent. And if you look at that video, and then see this game from a narrative standpoint, it is everything that was being criticized to a T. Just characters abruptly being violent, characters being like emotionally stunted, out of touch, and it's played for laughs. So it's not even fun it's not even cool in a violent way to me from the games that were, you know, haha, go figure, I'm saying this stupid shit. But as conservative as the Downtown Netetsu, like Kunio Tachi no Banka, or like you're playing as a delinquent where you mug people and you engage in capitalism. So as much as you see that, it's still kind of comical once you arrive at Yakuza. And well, sorry, I was wondering if my port changed. I forgot there's a bit of dialogue here. You're about to fight an incel. Yes, that's the way to beat incels, to punch them. I think ostracizing them is a little better, or just like mocking them ruthlessly. Alright, we're about to fight the next boss, but in those games you see someone at least hitting these moments of authenticity where it's like there was sports. You know, there's all these kids sort of engaged in their everyday school activities. These flashbacks are so bad. I think I took a 1-inch punch him off the roof. Okay. Oh. Can't do that one too much. I do believe that we're going to lose. Dead? Yep. Man, he combed his hair. Let's go back into it. And you gotta skip all this dialogue too. Well, in the original, I think you actually just had to skip it. Alright, give me a second. But that whole, like, everything with the music. Oh, okay. So if you do too much damage, there's a limit on how much damage Yamada can take before he bursts. So if you come here with the damage charm, it definitely changes the logistics of the fight. Now I know I can do it. So I had that bad habit. I thought I just had to lead with a 1-inch punch. You could just hit him. You could just hit him. Is that health? That's considerate of them. Well, bad. Making shits on this guy. How did I lose to you? Oh, gotta launch the 6. There. That's too far away. Summons darkness. But no, just the music and the overall plot where it becomes this narrative about these, like, it's just like, I know that kids are stupid, but it's something where it's like there's a mean-spiritedness coming from what I think are just out-of-touch adults. Like, the feeling I get is like, who are you to judge? Not to say that they aren't, but like to judge in such a way that you know that they're being hypocrites or whatever. Oh yeah, use that. And I think the spread happens. Oh, missed it. that's not even getting into the fact that, so when you're learning about Nozomi, this gets into why I said this was a Weeb game. So what you effectively have is a game that says it takes place... Nice, got it. It says it takes place in Japan, but then it's like, what town is Nozomi from? Bunsonville. Wherever the hell that is. So it just kind of shows that I feel like the cultural interest... Like, there are definitely, like... You know, we're always looking for words that identify, like, alright, when is someone... Like, Ian Miles Chong's dumbass is like an America Weeb, or whatever. But in a very political sense. But you could tell that in the art, like, when it came to, like, people depicting America or whatever, there's a sense where what these folks were thinking about, like, the resultant, I should say, kind of degenerates over time. Like, if you're inspired by a game, but you don't know what inspired the game, you're just making mechanics for it, then trying to do the same things, like, you can't always do them as well. So this isn't to mock anybody for, you know, necessarily wanting to make a Kunio game, but in what I guess I could call a lack of sincerity on my part, there's a moment where I do get frustrated that the games that this took after, they have better action. Or at least specifically that Kyoko and Misako come from Kunio Tachi no Banka, and you can look at that period and you can tell that this game uses the plot of that, but what I wish it did was actually copy the content. You know, actually do things that would make it a successor to that in a lot of meaningful ways. Instead, this takes after River City Ransom, and so you get them pointing out stuff that are traditions, like, who even reads this? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't think anyone fucking reads it. But then, in the original River City Ransom, not only did I think people read it, because clearly, like, they were making jokes about barf, but strangely, we are out of touch with, you know, what those things were even doing on a banal level. Like, I want to say that the guy that did, what is it? Legends of Localization. They were like, oh yeah, that's a good translation because it's marketable. Which was the most fucked up thing, like, I saw. I'm like, man, that's stupid. Marketable? Really? So, instead of going like, alright, whoever translated this was very obviously irritated because it's like there's this quote. I kind of want to know what it says in Japanese, like if they actually say like, are we having fun yet? Because that was a line that appeared in River City Ransom. And the impression that I get, even though I don't know, but the impression that I get is that whoever had to translate that wasn't having fun at their job, or at least they felt it. It's like weirdly, it's weirdly implicating the game itself. Oh yeah, I got that pile drive move I wanted to show. I think I'm supposed to go to downtown. Let's beat up this guy. 1, 2, 3, 4. You have to do that launcher immediately. 6. No, I don't. Except to not be dead. Oof. That is so cool. I think it uses more SP than I actually have. But yeah, the big reference back to a tangent I was making before. The fact you can get hit out of those moves and they cost as much as they do kind of sucks, but my mind, from where it's operating from, I'm looking at options less from a standard or standpoint of RPG mechanics and just raw action. So, for me, when I say that I feel that the game doesn't have meaningful focalization along RPG mechanics and whatnot, it's that someone even pointed this out. I think the most important stat in this game is speed. And then from there, maybe defense, but your levels scale to that. And enemies scale too. And that was a criticism that someone had made on the Steam forums of this game. That the RPG stats don't matter. But I think what they might have been getting at, even though I kind of agree, and the reason I think it's a bad thing is that the action doesn't focalize either. You don't have things that make you invincible. You're not presented with challenges that kind of force you to think about your tools. It's kind of an incoherent smattering of everything happening at once with your stats. Nice. You have stats that are... Get that? You have stats that, like, they're kind of good, but they're not too good. Until you get like a certain accessory. You have a special move gauge, you have these action mechanics like dashes, parries. But the parries aren't, like, the parries have limitations. You can't use parries against bosses. And I think that is where I kind of want to end this commentary on for now. Like, I was just getting ready for Saturday where I do God Hand. The problem with looking at a game that way, for like every singular encounter becomes about, oh, it's damage output. It becomes about, like, it's this very narrow example of how things are. The problem with looking at games that way is that you take the way that the game is experienced out of context. You don't see anything that the game is doing in a broad sense as having a cohesive, overarching theme or concept. You know, we say core gameplay, but what the heck is core gameplay? What does any of that mean? What does any of this language mean if you jettison it? If it doesn't actually mean anything to you when you actually have to start talking about things that are influenced or are expressing that language. Pile drive. So that's why someone telling me, like, oh, it would be too good if the suplex moves were invincible, or if there were invincibility on throws. Would it? You're constantly surrounded in this game. It took a patch to give me something that I could cover my back with. In Return of Double Dragon, you can run into that, but enemies wait. Like, it actually models itself after, it's modeling itself after an action movie. I think I'm not even going to experience anymore, but I don't care. I'm just waiting for this guy to die. Ooh, I am getting experience. I'm not going to continue this file anyway, but saying that, it kind of just shows to me that one issue of just looking at things like out of their historical context, looking at things out of their design context, it makes us incapable of having a language of criticism in general, or it limits it to people that actually read or actually do things where it's not just about a self-interested part of the consumption. If you want the most uncharitable take of what I think the person was doing, or their lens that was informing, like, the counterpoint to what I was saying, or at least when I asked about it, it's like, well, it'd be too good. Like, someone told me it would be silly to give, things could get a little crazy. They don't know that. And not only that, they're wrong. Like, in the context of this game, that is a relatively modest proposal. Because this game's biggest weakness is crowd control. I frequently pointed out, and you can see it throughout this game, like this gameplay that I'm doing, that there's no get off me move, there's no spin kick, Bushin Senpu Kyaku from Final Fight, double lariat. If you're in a pinch, you just basically have to eat it. And while I think that that's pretty faithful to the original River City Ransom, it doesn't make sense to mock or to point out how antiquated or out of touch anything is when you can't present something that's better than that old thing. If you can't outdo something that existed, what is it, 2020? So that came out in 86, 87, so what would that mean? It's 20, 30, so like 33? What is it, 33 years ago? If you can't outdo ideas from 33 years ago, I'm looking at your gameplay and it's just like, why are you telling jokes? You ain't good. And that's kind of coming from my FGC background, but, you know, not even FGC. It's coming from, because I don't want to use that term. I find myself to have, like, some kind of neuroses I have. It's probably rooted in competition and just envy that comes out of that. But I see someone telling a joke, or you see a game, like, cracking jokes and it sucks. And it's just like, okay, but you're not good. You know, that's the very thing that happens in my brain. But it's like, rather than focus on how stupid that is, I want to say that the good thing is to try to temper that reaction and just maybe at least put something that, like, something about those thoughts, like to present something within those that, like, can be processed or actually would mean something. And what I will say is that in terms of someone telling me, like, oh, this would be too good, I think a speedrunner would say that. Like, if you're just concerned with getting around something, or if it's something that you're good at, I feel that your opinion may honestly have a conflict of interest in general. Because if I were to get in this crowd, the solution to being surrounded is to move. It's to run away. And while movement is kind of good, why even emphasize having a parry? What you're doing is you're admitting that, as a designer, your game is admitting, or your game is illustrating that at some point you thought of counterplay. But when it really came down to it, you fucking bitched out. You pussied out. It's like, oh, well, it would be too good. That's stupid. Like, don't even put parries in your game then. Just make River City Ransom again, but Weeb edition. Like, don't put in counterplay. Because what I will say is that I'm not gonna talk about my preferences of drama, because I think that even then you could watch a movie or something. But it's also that I think it's beside the point that I want to make. Like, I look at this game and I feel like the one thing that I'm hooked on is action, but then the other thing I would say is that if I'm going to be entertained by this or engaged by it, I don't think that these games have to lead to just some dumb fantasy. It's very clear that the template could be used in a different way, and when you take inspiration from a game like Kunio Tachi no Banka, and the best you can do is be like, oh, this is a joke about a continuity error, while I violate that continuity. So, the girls in Kunio Tachi no Banka, like, everyone's gonna be like, oh, that's just a side story. I'm like, no, I don't think the problem is an adherence. The problem isn't a faithfulness to a storyline. The problem I have is that the interpretation of it, or the liberties, are stupid, comparatively. So, you can change whatever you want. That's great. The irony here is that Kunio Tachi no Banka, it's like, no, Mami and Kunio and Ricky weren't pure. Like, so they're hypocrites. Like, they met people before, and Mami and Hasebe aren't even their girlfriends. Like, Hasebe is a delinquent. She's not, like, she turns class rep to hide that, like, in the plot. Like, things change. Like, I don't care about the logistics of this. It's that if you're looking at that and go like, well, I want to offer my own unique take on it. It's that when I arrive here, I get a game with characters that, you know, it says that it's in Japan, but it's not really. So, just throw that out. It probably would have been cooler if they called it, like, Alex and Ryan. So you're seeing all the issues with, like, marketing. You're seeing the issue with designing a game for, like, market appeal versus its efficacy. versus point of design. And then it's like the action itself. Like, it's too cowardly to just be like, you know what, I'm gonna challenge you. Like, I believe challenge is a thing. And I don't mean challenge in terms of like, oh, you can whoop my ass, it's too easy. I just mean that there's the stuff of games that wanted to challenge you in this, but this game is neither... It's neither good at making those things just be something that you chew on, like, oh, it would be enough to me to stand above an enemy and just mash parry. And that was the extent of the AI. So a lot of these ideas that come from games like... The parry comes from Street Fighter 3, the way that we understand it now. Like, yes, there were games with weapon clashing or something that appeared to be a parry, but a parry that's a centralizing mechanic comes from Street Fighter 3. So, to take inspiration from something like that is to admit that those kind of mechanics are engaging on someone. Like that. But if what I'm limited to is just sort of very bare bones, threadbare situations where those mechanics apply, but the rationale is that, well, we can't make them too good. We can't make them stand out too much. That's what the person is saying. We can't stand out too much. It's like, but you can't even describe what this game is doing to the person that was telling me that. And you're a speedrunner. So, all you're doing is trying to get over. You're not playing in such a way that denotes engaging with the game on that level. Which is fine, but then there's a point where if you're going to be critical about how it's constructed, then you are. And in that sense, I feel like there's no leg to stand on. It's not even a feeling. So River City Girls to me is an interesting anomaly because I feel that strong playtesting or knowledge and direction, you may not have avoided the weebness, but you would definitely have a good action RPG. But that's why the references feel threadbare. I don't give a shit where Kyoko and Misako come from relative to what this game is trying to say, because it just doesn't matter. Those games are so... These two games are so wildly different. This is some preppy geek's idea of, you know, the things that inspired that. So I think that's a good case against... there's a good case to make there against mimesis and whether it actually leads you to give a shit about any kind of cultural signifier, rather than this thing become the signifier itself. So the game is what takes center stage. Its references are just like garnish, at best. It's like trying to learn about a meal or trying to satiate yourself on fucking parsley. Like, that sort of thing. But all that being said, you know, that's like the worst case scenario it takes. For me, what it boils down to is that it's not any sort of, faithfulness to plot. It's not like, well, is it more like this thing I like? It's that I think that we can know why things are good. And in that sense, I feel like River City Girls is very much a product of present moment game design. In action. Like, there's not a lot of thought put to flow. Like, someone was telling me on my channel, hey, you think about things in terms of game terms, but this is a scenario. I'm like, the scenario is an action movie. Like, the only one thinking about terms in game design is a person that tries to articulate that, you know, via, I guess, a bad faith kind of deception. Going like, oh, it's realistic, but the scenario is that you're outnumbered. But you're playing as a bunch of characters in Streets of Rage 4 that jump out of planes. That was the context of it. So in the case of these games, I think that the talk about God Hand should be interesting, because I think that if your flow absolutely means something in reference to creating games where you have parries, you have mechanics from fighting games that were seriously competitive, it's not that all of a sudden this has to be a competitive game, but it's that within that there's this acknowledgement that those mechanics, they have a way that can be good in terms of expression. There's a meaningful way, or a way that hits at a craft level where there is such a thing as doing this poorly. And until we kind of acknowledge that, then it doesn't mean anything to have parries. It's just like stupid. It's like, oh, it's something that you didn't need to do. So I think that the talk about God Hand should be pretty interesting, because I feel that that's a game that takes nothing about itself for granted. Like, when I look at that game, things are done purposefully on so many levels. Like, you can even see Shinji Mikami's kind of, like, how fed up he is with, you know, business in general. And then seeing him talk about it in the past tenses, or, you know, after the fact, is pretty interesting. Because he equated himself to a criminal. But he also talked about, you know, the games that came afterwards, like, he never called, like, a small project indie, for instance. So, it's not inherently indie just to have a small team. To him, indie was like a business venture. He's like, oh, there was an indie spirit behind Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. And then he's like, it wasn't that good. I'm like, damn, dude. So, I'll stop here for now and upload. I just want to get that practice talk in for Saturday. And again, God Hand should definitely be interesting, at least from a mechanicals perspective. Because I do think that I need to consult that video today to get those quotes from Mikami. There's a really wonderful interview with Shinji Mikami that I would highly recommend checking out. In fact, I'm going to find it right now. Yeah, let's see. Do that, because I don't want someone seeing my screen. I think it's because the Steam window is, you know, that's fine. It's just the Steam page. Alright, so YouTube. Then Shinji Mikami. It's on Archipel. Is that oh man, that's kind of... Is that because Japan's an archipelago? Oh, you sneaky bastards. So, I'll post it here in case anyone's actually watching this. But, that is a wonderful interview. Like, it's probably one of the... Like, it's one of the few in-person video-based interviews with Shinji Mikami. And if you ever watch Hideki Kamiya, for instance, talk about his working relationship with Mikami-san, Mr. Mikami, Shinji Mikami, a lot of what's in this interview is so funny when you know that Hideki Kamiya and Shinji Mikami are so disparate as directors, but Kamiya has such reverence for Shinji Mikami because they had a working relationship despite that. Like, it was where Mikami really held Kamiya's feet to the fire in a way that I think if Kamiya wouldn't be as good as he is if Shinji Mikami didn't force him to, like, do his job. So, with that said, I'm going to cut the stream and play my game by myself. I'll upload this, and then please look forward to Saturday. I still haven't thought a title for this, but I guess we'll get there. For now, it's like prototype. I'm scripting I'm actually scripting something for a video, like a video essay. But in the meantime, I think what's engaged me or got me on that is just the excitement of being able to kind of do chats about games. That's where I shine. I'm not a very strong writer at all, but hey, I talk too much. So things can come out. Thank you for watching.